The envelope sat innocuously on Henry's desk, its crisp white edges a stark contrast against the polished mahogany surface. I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly, an inexplicable sense of dread coiling in my stomach. As I slid the letter out, the unmistakable scent of a woman's perfume wafted up, a sickly sweet aroma that made my head spin. "Ruth, darling, what are you doing?" Henry's voice startled me, and I whirled around, the letter clutched in my hand like a damning piece of evidence. "Who is Mary?" I demanded, my voice quivering with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Henry's face paled, and he stumbled back, clutching his chest. "Where did you find that?" he gasped, his eyes wide with panic. I thrust the letter towards him, the words tumbling out in a rush. "In your desk drawer, along with a dozen others. Love letters, Henry? From a woman half your age?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, he doubled over, his face contorted in pain. "Ruth, you have to call an ambulance," he choked out, his fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my ears, a lifetime of resentment and hurt bubbling to the surface. "No, Henry," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You can manage alone, just like you always wanted." His eyes widened in shock, and he reached out a trembling hand towards me. "Ruth, please." But I had already turned away, the letter crumpled in my fist. I strode out of the study, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of our once perfect home. In the kitchen, I poured myself up a glass of wine, my hands shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the bottle. I sank into a chair, the cool liquid a welcome balm against the burning rage that consumed me. How could he? After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made for him, for our marriage? I thought back to the early days, when his charm and intellect had swept me off my feet. I was a passionate literature teacher then, my life brimming with purpose and dreams. Henry had seemed like the perfect partner, someone who understood and appreciated my love for the arts. We'd spent countless evenings discussing poetry and philosophy, our minds and souls intertwined in a beautiful dance of shared passions. But slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic had shifted. Henry's ambition had taken precedence, and he'd insisted that I give up my teaching job to support his career. At first, I'd acquiesced, convinced that it was a temporary sacrifice for the greater good of our partnership. How naive I'd been. The years had slipped by, and I'd found myself increasingly isolated, my dreams and aspirations withering away like neglected flowers. Henry's control had tightened, his criticisms and belittling remarks chipping away at my self-worth until I was little more than a shell of my former self. And now this ultimate betrayal. I drained the glass, the wine leaving a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. Enough was enough. I would not be a victim any longer, a mere footnote in the story of Henry's life. It was time to reclaim my narrative, to write a new chapter where I was the author, the master of my own destiny. I squared my shoulders, a newfound resolve coursing through my veins. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in decades I felt alive, a spark of hope igniting within me. Henry could keep his mistress and his lies. I was done playing the role of the dutiful, subservient wife. It was time for Ruth Parker to take center stage. I sank deeper into the plush armchair, cradling the glass of wine like a lifeline as memories flooded my mind. How had it all gone so wrong? The first time I laid eyes on Henry, it was at a community theater production of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I was captivated by his commanding presence on stage, his rich baritone voice resonating through the auditorium. After the show, a group of us had gathered at a local cafe to discuss the performance, and that's when I met him. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on the play. We debated the nuances of Hamlet's character, our words dancing in a delightful tango of intellectual discourse. By the end of the evening, I was smitten. Our courtship was a whirlwind of shared passions and dreams. Henry was pursuing his law degree, and I was a dedicated literature teacher, pouring my heart into shaping young minds. We were kindred spirits, united in our love for the arts and our ambitions. On our wedding day, I remember standing before him, my heart swelling with joy and hope for the future we would build together. His vows promised a partnership of equals, a commitment to supporting each other's aspirations and nurturing our individual growth. Those first few years were blissful. We attended poetry readings and art exhibitions, our conversations flowing like a gentle stream, nourishing our souls. Henry was attentive and supportive, and I basked in the warmth of his affection. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tides began to shift. Henry's career took precedence, and he insisted that I leave my teaching job to focus on supporting his ambitions. At first, I acquiesced, convinced that it was a temporary sacrifice for the greater good of our partnership. "It won't be forever, my love," he had assured me, his eyes shining with ambition. "Once I've established myself, you can pursue your passions again." Foolishly, I believed him. The years trickled by, and my dreams withered like neglected flowers. Henry's control over our lives tightened, his criticisms and belittling remarks chipping away at my self-worth. I became a shadow of my former self, a mere accessory to his success. Whenever I broached the subject of returning to teaching, he would dismiss me with a wave of his hand. "You know how demanding my career is, Ruth. We can't afford any distractions right now." And so I remained trapped, my once vibrant spirit slowly suffocating under the weight of his dominance. It wasn't until Edna, Henry's mother, fell ill that I glimpsed a glimmer of hope. Henry insisted that we move into her home to care for her, and I reluctantly agreed, desperate for any change in my stagnant existence. Edna was a formidable woman, her sharp tongue and critical nature a constant source of tension. But as the months wore on, something unexpected happened. Beneath her prickly exterior, she began to see the genuine kindness and patience I exhibited, qualities that her son seemed to have forgotten. In those rare moments when Henry was absent, Edna and I would share quiet conversations, and a tentative bond formed between us. She saw the toll Henry's neglect and control had taken on me, and her eyes would soften with a mixture of pity and understanding. "You deserve better, my dear," she whispered to me one evening, her frail hand squeezing mine. "Don't let him break your spirit." Her words were like a lifeline, a reminder of the woman I once was, the woman I still longed to be, and then, just like that, she was gone. Edna's passing should have been a relief, a chance to breathe after months of grueling caregiving, but instead it only served to magnify the gaping chasm that had formed between Henry and me. In the aftermath of her death, I found myself adrift, untethered from the fragile bond that had kept me anchored to our crumbling marriage. Henry retreated further into his work, his absence both physical and emotional, leaving me to navigate the turbulent waters alone. It was during this time that the true extent of his control over my life became glaringly apparent. Without Edna's presence, I was left with nothing but the suffocating silence of our once vibrant home, a constant reminder of the dreams I had sacrificed. "Ruth, you know I can't be bothered with trivial matters," Henry would snap whenever I broached the subject of my desires. "My career demands my full attention." His words cut deeper than any knife, stripping away what little self-worth I had left. I was nothing more than a burden, an afterthought in his relentless pursuit of success. Finances were another weapon in his arsenal of dominance. Henry had insisted on handling all our accounts, citing his superior financial acumen as justification. I was left with a meager allowance, just enough to cover basic necessities, while he indulged in extravagances without a second thought. "A woman of your age has no need for such frivolities," he would scoff whenever I expressed a desire for something beyond the bare essentials. His words stung, but I had learned to swallow my pride, to bury my dreams beneath the weight of his contempt. It was during one of our rare evenings together that the final blow came. I had mustered the courage to suggest taking a part-time teaching position at the local community college, a tentative step towards reclaiming a piece of my former self. Henry's reaction was swift and brutal. "Absolutely not," he thundered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I will not have my wife gallivanting about like some common laborer." I recoiled as if struck, my heart shattering into a million pieces. "But Henry, it's just a few classes," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "It would mean so much to me." He slammed his fist on the table, the force of it rattling the dishes. "Enough! You will do as I say, or there will be consequences." In that moment I saw him for what he truly was, a tyrant, a man so consumed by his own ego that he would crush the very soul of the woman he claimed to love. As he stormed out of the room, I sank to the floor, my body racked with silent sobs. How had I allowed myself to become so diminished, so utterly powerless? It was then that I stumbled upon Edna's letter, tucked away in a drawer, her elegant script a stark contrast to the harsh reality of my life. "My dearest Ruth," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have departed this world, leaving you to navigate the treacherous waters of my son's selfishness alone." I clutched the letter tightly, my eyes devouring each word as if it were a lifeline. "Henry has become a man I scarcely recognize, consumed by his own ambition and blinded to the beauty and strength that resides within you. You deserve so much more than the gilded cage he has constructed around your spirit." Tears streamed down my face as I read on, Edna's words resonating deep within my soul. "Do not let him break you, my dear. Find the courage to spread your wings and soar, for you were meant for so much more than this half-life of servitude." As I reached the end of the letter, a newfound resolve took root within me. Edna had seen the truth, had recognized the injustice of my situation, and in her final act she had given me the gift of validation. I was not the problem. Henry was. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself. No longer would I be a prisoner in my own life. It was time to reclaim my identity, to shed the shackles of Henry's control and embrace the freedom that had been denied to me for far too long. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope ignite within me. I was done being a spectator in my own story. It was time to take center stage. The news of Edna's illness hit like a ton of bricks. Henry's domineering mother had always been a formidable presence in our lives, her sharp tongue and critical nature a constant source of tension. "We'll have to move in with her," Henry announced one evening, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "She'll need round-the-clock care, and I can't be bothered with hiring nurses." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. Henry's mind was made up, as it always was, and my opinion held no weight. Within a matter of weeks, we had packed up our lives and relocated to Edna's sprawling home on the outskirts of town. The atmosphere was suffocating, a constant reminder of the sacrifices I had made for this family. Edna's health was rapidly declining, and the burden of her care fell squarely on my shoulders. Henry was rarely present, his work taking precedence over everything else, as usual. "You knew what you were signing up for when you married my son," Edna would sneer, her eyes boring into me with a mixture of disdain and pity. I would bite my tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to spill forth. What good would it do to argue with this bitter, ailing woman? The days blurred together in a haze of medication schedules, meal preparations, and endless cleaning. Edna was a demanding patient, her sharp tongue lashing out at the slightest perceived misstep. "Honestly, Ruth, can't you do anything right?" she would snap, her bony fingers gripping my arm with surprising strength. I would force a smile, my jaw clenched so tightly that it ached. "Of course, Edna. I'll do better next time." But there was no pleasing her, no respite from her constant criticism. Even Henry's rare visits did little to alleviate the tension, as he would simply nod along with his mother's complaints, his eyes averted from mine. It was during one of those interminable nights, as I sat by Edna's bedside, that something unexpected happened. Her usual acerbic demeanor had softened, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "You know, Ruth," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "you remind me of myself when I was younger." I stared at her, taken aback by the rare glimpse of vulnerability she was displaying. "I had dreams, too," she continued, her gaze fixed on some distant point. "But I let them slip away, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but bitterness and regret." A lump formed in my throat as I listened, her words striking a chord deep within me. "Don't make the same mistake I did, dear," she said, her frail hand reaching out to grasp mine. "Don't let my son break you." In that moment, I saw the woman she once was, the vibrant spirit that had been slowly crushed by the weight of her own choices. And in her eyes, I saw a glimmer of understanding, a recognition of the path I was treading. From that day on, something shifted between us. Edna's barbs lost their sting, and a tentative bond began to form. She would share stories of her youth, her dreams of becoming a painter, and I would listen with rapt attention, clinging to the hope that it wasn't too late for me. Edna's passing, when it finally came, was both a relief and a source of profound sadness. As I held her hand in those final moments, her eyes met mine, and I saw a silent plea, a plea for me to find the strength she had lost. In the aftermath of her death, I found myself adrift, untethered from the fragile connection that had kept me grounded. But Edna's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I had a choice to make. I could continue down this path of subjugation, allowing Henry's dominance to strip away the last vestiges of my identity. Or I could heed Edna's warning and reclaim the life that had been denied to me for far too long. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I was done being a prisoner in my own story. It was time to take the pen and write a new chapter, one where I was the author, the master of my own destiny. The months that followed Edna's passing were a blur of exhaustion and emotional turmoil. The bond we had forged in her final days had awakened something within me, a glimmer of hope that I could reclaim the life I had sacrificed for Henry's ambitions. But as the days trickled by, that hope began to wane, crushed beneath the weight of Henry's indifference and my own mounting despair. "Ruth, I don't understand why you're making such a fuss," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mother's affairs are settled, and we can finally move on with our lives." Move on? As if the past 6 months of grueling caregiving, of bearing the brunt of Edna's demands while he remained absent, meant nothing. "Henry, I need your support," I pleaded one evening, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "I can't keep doing this alone," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be ridiculous. You've managed just fine without me." His words cut like a knife, reopening the wounds of neglect and belittlement that had festered for years. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure in the face of his callous disregard. "I'm your wife, Henry," I said, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. "Not your servant, not your mother's caretaker, your partner." He met my gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "And I'm your husband, Ruth. It's your duty to support me, no matter the sacrifices required." That was the breaking point. Years of suppressed anger and resentment came crashing down, a tidal of emotion that I could no longer contain. Duty? I spat, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "Is that what you call this miserable existence? A life of servitude, stripped of my dreams, my passions, my very identity?" Henry recoiled, taken aback by the fury in my voice. "Ruth, you're being hysterical. Calm down and listen to reason." "Reason?" I laughed bitterly. "What reason could possibly justify the way you've treated me, the way you've crushed my spirit beneath the weight of your ambition?" His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then his expression shifted, a flicker of something akin to fear passing across his features. "You ungrateful wretch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve hardening with each passing second. "No, Henry. It's you who have taken everything from me piece by piece until there was nothing left but a hollow shell." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Enough. I'm done, Henry. Done with your lies, your manipulation, your utter disregard for my happiness." His eyes widened as I reached into the drawer of the end table, withdrawing the letter Edna had left me, the letter that had ignited the spark of rebellion within me. "Your own mother saw the truth," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and determination. "She knew the pain you inflicted upon me, and in her final act she urged me to find the strength to break free." Henry's face drained of color as I brandished the letter, the damning evidence of his mother's betrayal. "Ruth, please," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate pleading. "We can work through this. I'll change, I promise." But his words rang hollow, a feeble attempt to cling to the control he had wielded for so long. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "No, Henry, it's too late for promises. I'm leaving, and this time it's for good." As I turned and walked away, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years I felt alive, a fire burning within me that no amount of oppression could extinguish. I was free, and nothing, not Henry, not the ghosts of my past, would ever chain me again. The days following my declaration of independence were a whirlwind of activity. I had spent too long trapped in the gilded cage of Henry's making, and now that the door was open, I was determined to seize every opportunity for freedom. First on the agenda was securing my financial independence. For years, Henry had kept a tight grip on our finances, doling out meager allowances while indulging in extravagances without a second thought. But Edna's letter had included a surprising revelation. a sizable inheritance that she had left solely in my name. "Use it wisely, my dear," her elegant script had urged. "Build the life you deserve, free from the shackles of my son's control." With those funds, I was able to retain a fierce divorce attorney, a woman whose steely resolve matched my own. Together, we crafted an airtight case, documenting Henry's emotional abuse and financial manipulation with meticulous detail. Henry, of course, was livid when he discovered my intentions. "You ungrateful shrew," he spat, his face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve unwavering. "No, Henry. This is me reclaiming the life you stole from me, piece by piece." His eyes widened as I produced the divorce papers, the stark reality of my determination finally sinking in. "You can't be serious," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate pleading. "Ruth, please, we can work through this." But his words fell on deaf ears. I had heard enough empty promises, enough lies disguised as concern. This time, I held all the power, and I intended to wield it without mercy. "It's over, Henry," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Sign the papers, or I'll have no choice but to take this to court." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might refuse. But then, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of fear, a realization that his control over me had finally shattered. With trembling hands, he reached for the pen and scrawled his signature across the dotted line, sealing his fate and my freedom in a single stroke. As I turned to leave, a sudden commotion behind me made me pause. Henry had collapsed, clutching his chest and gasping for air. "Ruth, you have to call an ambulance," he choked out, his eyes wide with panic. I should have felt pity, remorse, something akin to the concern a wife should have for her ailing husband. But as I looked down at him, all I felt was a profound sense of detachment, a realization that this man had forfeited any claim to my compassion long ago. "No, Henry," I said, my voice calm and unwavering. "I don't have to do anything for you anymore." His eyes widened in shock, but I had already turned away, the weight of his pleas sliding off me like water off a duck's back. As I strode out of the house, my head held high, I felt a surge of exhilaration coursing through my veins. This was it. The moment I had dreamed of for so long, the moment when I finally broke free from the shackles of Henry's control. In that instant, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of my oppression. Henry's reign was over, and a new chapter in my life was just beginning. I was free, and nothing, not Henry, not the ghosts of my past, would ever chain me again. The days following my confrontation with Henry were a blur of activity, fueled by a newfound sense of determination and purpose. I had spent far too long trapped in the gilded cage of his making, and now that the door was open, I was determined to seize every opportunity for freedom. My first order of business was to seek refuge with the one person I knew I could count on, my sister Joyce. She had been a constant source of support throughout the years, offering a sympathetic ear and a shoulder to lean on whenever Henry's cruelty became too much to bear. When I showed up on her doorstep, suitcase in hand, she took one look at my face and ushered me inside without a word. Joyce had always been perceptive, able to read the depths of my emotions with a single glance. "It's over, Joyce," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "I left him." Her eyes widened, and then she pulled me into a fierce embrace, her arms enveloping me with a warmth and acceptance that I had been denied for far too long. "Oh, Ruth," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you." In that moment, the floodgates opened, and years of pent-up pain and anguish came pouring out. I clung to Joyce, my body racked with sobs as I purged the toxicity that had been slowly poisoning my soul. Through it all, she held me, her strength and unwavering support a lifeline that kept me tethered to reality. In the days that followed, Joyce became my rock, my anchor in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. She helped me navigate the legal intricacies of the divorce, ensuring that every step was taken to secure my independence and protect me from Henry's retaliation. And when the nightmares came, as they inevitably did, she was there, holding my hand and reminding me of the strength that had carried me this far. "You are a survivor, Ruth," she would say, her eyes shining with a fierce pride. "Never forget that." With Joyce's encouragement, I began to take tentative steps towards reclaiming the life that had been denied to me for so long. I sought out old friends, rekindling connections that had been severed by Henry's isolating grip. Their warm embraces and words of support were like balm to my wounded soul, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. And slowly, bit by bit, the pieces of my shattered identity began to reform, like a delicate mosaic pieced together with care and determination. It was during this time that I received the news of Henry's hospitalization. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, a lingering remnant of the dutiful wife I had been conditioned to be. But that fleeting moment of weakness was quickly overshadowed by a sense of resolve, a realization that I owed this man nothing. "He made his choices, Ruth," Joyce said, her voice firm but laced with compassion, "and now he must face the consequences." Her words resonated deeply, a validation of the path I had chosen. Henry's downfall was not my burden to bear. It was the inevitable result of his own actions, a reckoning long overdue. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I felt a profound shift within me. The shackles of Henry's control had been broken, and in their place, a newfound sense of freedom and purpose took root. I was no longer defined by the confines of my marriage, no longer bound by the expectations and limitations imposed upon me. I was Ruth Parker, a woman reborn, with a future as vast and limitless as the horizon stretching before me. And as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I felt a surge of exhilaration and gratitude. The road ahead would undoubtedly be paved with challenges, but for the first time in decades, I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of my oppression. Henry's reign was over, and a new era, my era, had begun. The months that followed my departure from Henry's life were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. With Joyce's unwavering support, I navigated the legal intricacies of the divorce, ensuring that every step was taken to secure my independence and protect me from Henry's retaliation. It was during this time that I received an unexpected windfall, a sizable inheritance from Edna, left solely in my name. Her final act of defiance against her son's tyranny, a testament to the bond we had forged in her final days. "Use it wisely, my dear," her elegant script had urged. "Build the life you deserve, free from the shackles of my son's control." And so I did, channeling those funds into securing my own modest apartment, a cozy sanctuary where I could begin to rebuild the pieces of my shattered identity. But even as I reveled in my newfound freedom, the ghosts of my past lingered, whispering insidious doubts and fears. What if Henry refused to let me go? What if his thirst for control drove him to seek retribution? Those concerns were put to rest one fateful afternoon when a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Henry standing before me, a mere shadow of his former self. "Ruth," he rasped, his voice tinged with desperation. "Please, we need to talk." I steeled myself, determined not to let his pleas sway me from the path I had chosen. "There's nothing left to say, Henry," I replied, my tone firm but laced with a hint of pity. "The divorce is final. It's time for you to move on." His eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might try to reassert the control he had once held over me. But then his shoulders slumped and he nodded, a defeated man. "I never meant for it to go this far," he murmured, his gaze downcast. "I was a fool, Ruth, a fool who took the most precious thing in his life for granted." I said nothing, letting his words hang in the air between us, a bitter acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for everything." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing from my life as abruptly as he had entered it all those years ago. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on rebuilding the pieces of my life, one small step at a time. With the financial security of Edna's inheritance, I was able to pursue my long-dormant passion for teaching, securing a part-time position at the local community college. The first time I stepped into that classroom, a rush of emotions washed over me. Excitement, trepidation, and above all, a profound sense of purpose. This was where I belonged, shaping young minds and igniting their love for literature, just as I had done so many years ago. As I stood before those eager faces, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the shackles of Henry's control finally falling away. I was no longer defined by the limitations he had imposed upon me. I was Ruth Parker, a woman reborn, with a future as vast and limitless as the horizon stretching before me. With each passing day, my confidence grew, nurtured by the support of my newfound community, colleagues who celebrated my passion, students who hung on my every word, and friends who had welcomed me back into their lives with open arms. And through it all, Joyce remained my steadfast ally, her unwavering belief in me a constant source of strength and inspiration. "Look at you, Ruth," she would say, her eyes shining with pride. "You've blossomed into the woman you were always meant to be." Her words resonated deeply, a validation of the long and arduous journey I had undertaken to reach this point. I had faced the depths of despair and emerged victorious, a phoenix rising from the ashes of my oppression. As the first anniversary of my newfound independence approached, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been, the timid, broken creature who had allowed herself to be diminished by a man's cruelty. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the freedom I had claimed, but for the resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the demons of her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was the master of my own destiny. Henry's reign was over, and a new era, my era, had begun.
You should be grateful that someone as plain and gloomy as you was embraced by me. I'm sorry, but I found a younger lover. It was a sudden event. My husband, who had always been gentle like a gentleman, was now hurling terrifying insults at me. This was at the entrance of our home. I had just returned home and could not comprehend the situation. What do you mean? I hoped it was a dream and that I would wake up soon. Trembling, I shouted as loudly as I could at the merciless man before me. That's what I've been telling you. I've never been interested in an old hag like you. I've already accomplished my goal with our marriage. Just sign the divorce papers and get out. My husband continued to berate me, making me feel even more frightened. Looking down on me, he resembled a demon from a painting of hell. What goal? And you're telling me to get out of this house? But this house is. Then an unbelievable truth came from my husband's mouth. I've sold the house. After we divorce, I plan to live elegantly with the money with my lover. Shocked by these unexpected words, I realized that all the happy days we had spent together and the kind words and smiles of my husband were all lies. They were merely means to an end for him. I had been deceived by my husband. He was grabbing his new happiness, and I was left with nothing, falling into the darkness of loneliness. That was the ending he wanted for us. However, if he knew my true identity, he would quickly change his tune. I understand. I swore in my heart to make sure this man could never walk proudly under the sun again. From this moment, as I clenched my fist, my triumphant advance began. My name is Olivia. I'm 42 years old. I live in a high-rise apartment a little away from the city where the sparkling night view from the high floor is breathtakingly beautiful. I work at a trading company whose head office is located in a skyscraper in the city center, handling numerous administrative tasks daily, such as document and material preparation and support for sales staff. Although it seems like I lead a glamorous life, I'm single without a boyfriend. I dress in plain suits like a job-seeking student, with my black hair tied back and black-rimmed glasses. No man approaches me with such an appearance. Moreover, in the office, I am disparaged as an old maid, and female employees who leave work on time to pick up their children from daycare dump their work on me. For the past few years, I haven't been punching out on time. My days are spent commuting between home and work. Only the night sky, which I gaze at with a sigh, gently envelopes me. After returning home, the first thing I do is pray to the smiling portraits of my deceased parents, which has become my morning and evening routine. Mom, Dad, I'm home. Of course, they always greet me silently and kindly. My parents died 10 years ago in a car accident involving their car and a large truck. Human life is fleeting. No matter how much I called their names, they never came back when I rushed to the hospital. Being estranged from relatives and having no siblings, I became completely alone. I don't wish for great happiness. Modesty is enough. I don't desire luxury. I just hope to continue this life without losing anything more precious. One day in April, after working overtime, I walked through the unusually lively streets on my way home. The sky was completely dark, and the chilly air made me shiver. However, the warmth of the city remained unabated, and the cheeks of the merry people were flushed with excitement. Ah, it's Friday today, I thought. There must be welcoming parties happening everywhere. As I hurried home, ignoring the cherry trees along the streets that were not allowed to sleep under the multitude of lights, it happened, a dull thud, and suddenly my vision was obstructed. It smelled of alcohol. It seemed I had bumped into a drunk person. Just as I apologized and tried to move away, a drunken man approached me, breathing alcohol-laden breath without reservation. He was probably complaining to me, but his words were slurred. I tried to escape in fear, but more of the drunkard's friends arrived. Surrounded by a circle of drunkards, I couldn't move. That's when a man pushed through the crowd and rushed to me. He argued with the drunkards for a few minutes, but thanks to his resolute demeanor, the drunkards didn't resist any further. Afterward, he grabbed my hand, and we started walking quickly. I couldn't see the man's face, but as I followed the tall figure in a trench coat, my heartbeat gradually quickened. You're safe now. There are quite a few drunkards out tonight. Such people, usually weak, become bold with alcohol, especially when the opponent is a woman. It's the worst. He looked down at me with a refreshing smile. Being stared at so closely by such a handsome man, I was too embarrassed to look up. My heartbeat intensified, and my face grew hotter. Are you okay? It must have been scary, but don't worry anymore. That was my limit. Being treated kindly by such a handsome man, who lacked immunity to men, felt like I might just melt away from embarrassment. I should leave quickly. Ah, thank you. I really appreciate your help. Excuse me. I turned my back on the man and started walking. Wait, it's dangerous for a woman to walk alone on such a night. I'll walk you to your front door, the man chased after me. It's okay. Besides, I'm an old maid. I might get tangled up but not attacked. If such a wonderful man walked with someone like me, he would surely feel embarrassed. He grabbed my hand again. I turned around suddenly and looked up at him. That's when I first saw his eyes. He was also staring intently at me. What are you talking about? You must have been scared. I'm worried about you. I'll escort you. Drawn into his clear eyes, I nodded involuntarily. Thank you. Then we enjoyed trivial conversations as we walked home. I was warmed by his innocent smiles and the care he showed by escorting me over bumps and narrow paths. It was my first experience of this kind in life. Thank you very much. This is where I live. The 15 minutes I spent with him flew by, and we arrived in front of my apartment building. Then the man looked up at the building, surprised. It was not hard to imagine why. It was hard to imagine that such a plain woman like me lived in such a luxurious high-rise apartment. You live in such a beautiful apartment. Do you live here with your parents? Normally, I would hesitate to share personal information with someone I just met, but I owed him a favor and could trust him. My parents have passed away. I bought this apartment in my own name since I'll probably be single for life. I laughed, and he smiled kindly. Since you helped me today, may I offer you my thanks? It's not like me to say this, but I am truly surprised by myself. However, I sincerely wanted to thank him, and it's true that I wanted to spend a bit more time with this man. He kindly nodded, and we exchanged contact information before parting. His name is David, and he is 40 years old. True to his name, he is a kind and generous man. That night, I couldn't fall asleep easily. His calm smile haunted my thoughts, and before I knew it, I was thinking about him constantly. Even though I'm an old maid, in the spring of my 42nd year, a time when love had been absent, I fell in love with him. Later, responding to my courageous invitation, he and I dined at a French restaurant in a hotel. A woman shouldn't have to pay, he said as he stopped me from paying and offered his card instead. I intended to treat him but ended up being treated myself. On another holiday, we went to an aquarium together. David, who enjoys fishing and marine sports and has extensive knowledge of fish, led me into a world I did not know. Olivia, you are truly humble and wonderful. It's like a miracle that we met while both still single. I blushed involuntarily at his shy smile. Thus, our relationship rapidly grew closer, and it naturally evolved into us dating. Then, a few months later, he proposed to me. The proposal came during a dinner on a cruise ship, which is popular for its nighttime scenery. It was the scenario I had secretly longed for, and he gently offered me a ring. Looking into his earnest eyes, I nodded. It was like a dream, a Cinderella story. However, there was one thing that concerned me about marrying him: children. At 42, I had to consider the possibility that I might not be able to have children. As if seeing through my worries, David held my hand and whispered, "I want to be with you, Olivia. Even if we can't have children, we can be happy together." He always embraced me gently, and I felt constantly saved by him. Thus, we got married and started our happy life together in the apartment I owned. 6 months passed. Our married life was going smoothly. We devoted ourselves to our jobs during the day and spent quiet evenings together. However, my concerns were confirmed, and despite several attempts, we were unable to conceive. It's something that's given, and there's no need to rush. Also, you shouldn't blame yourself. Perhaps I'm the one with the issue. My husband always encouraged me with his gentle smile, even as I focused too much on our ages. Yet I couldn't give up on my dream of having at least one child. I visited a well-known gynecologist to learn about infertility treatments. There were options for advanced and expensive treatments which would require my husband's cooperation. However, my husband frowned upon the idea of fertility treatments and was reluctant. There's no need to go that far. There are many happy couples without children. I don't want a pregnancy that requires so much effort. He left the living room coldly, leaving those words behind. It seemed I had upset him. Maybe I had pushed too hard out of my desire to have children. We should have discussed it more as a couple, perhaps. I had also demanded too much by keeping track of my ovulation dates. My actions likely pressured him. After that, our marital relation ceased, and my husband began to sleep with his back turned to me. It was my fault, I had angered him. It was too late to regret it, but we couldn't repair our relationship, and half a year passed. Hey, our first wedding anniversary is coming up soon, right? How about we go out to eat for the first time in a while? Remember the cruise ship where we have good memories? There are still seats available on that weekday. We can still make a reservation for dinner. If we could spend a pleasant time facing each other like back then, maybe his feelings would return, I thought. With a bit of hope, I dared to invite him. At first, my husband was surprised and hesitant, but when I said it would be my treat, he nodded, not entirely displeased. That sounds good. It might be nice to eat out for a change. The food there was delicious. Relieved by his softened expression, I immediately made the reservation and looked forward to the day. On the day of the appointment, I finished work on time for the first time in a while, went home to change into a dress I usually don't wear, and headed to the meeting place. The sound of my heels bouncing made my heart flutter. Surely, my husband would be surprised to see me like this. I arrived at the boarding area at the harbor. My husband was not yet there. I had arrived a bit early, so I decided to wait for him. Since getting married, we had stopped having dates like this, but today was special. The anticipation of waiting for him felt just like the old times. As passengers boarded one by one, my husband still hadn't arrived. I checked the time, the departure was approaching. Despite multiple calls, there was no response from my husband, and gradually, anxiety began to dominate me. I was approached several times by the crew staff, but I could only wait for him. Then the ship sailed on time, and I was left alone at the harbor. Still, I waited, believing he would come. Before I knew it, 2 hours had passed without any contact from him. Could something have happened to him? A foreboding feeling crossed my mind. With that thought, I hurried home. I prayed over and over that my husband was safe. When I opened the front door, I was shocked because an unexpected scene unfolded before my eyes. "Hey, you're late. Were you waiting for me all alone at the harbor?" That must have been tough. The man looking down on me and laughing mockingly was undoubtedly my husband. For some reason, he was packing his belongings into a duffel bag. "Why are you at home? You remember we had a plan today, right?" Ignoring my concern, my husband burst into loud laughter. "Oh, of course. How does it feel to be left alone at the harbor? Or did you ride the ship alone and eat a dinner for two?" Clearly, this was not the gentle and kind husband I knew. What's going on? Why has he changed so drastically? I couldn't understand the situation. And what's with that outfit? A 43-year-old hag dressing like that, trying to lure me to bed. It's nauseating. I have no use for you anymore. Ah, this must be a dream. This man is not my husband. He would never say such cruel things, I told myself, but my mind went blank. Why are you crying? I don't want to see an old hag's tears. I made a mistake getting married. I should have chosen a younger, fresher woman. Tears flowed down my cheeks before I realized it. I wished this nightmare would end soon. My husband's insults and verbal abuse only got worse. It was easy to deceive you. Just a few sweet words, and you were hooked right from the start. When I first saw your house, I decided then I was going to take it over. It must have been tough for a plain office worker like you to pay off the mortgage on this room. Thanks to you, the contract went smoothly. I couldn't believe what my husband was saying. Take over. What do you mean, what contract? As I trembled, my husband cruelly continued. The purpose of our marriage was to get this house. I've never been interested in a plain old hag like you. But living with you turned out to be incredibly boring. I thought I could live a more elegant life, but you being so frugal made it utterly joyless. Each of his abusive words pierced my heart as he continued to raise his voice, unconcerned. What infertility treatment? It's too late for you. You should be grateful I even touched a plain and gloomy old hag like you. Actually, I have a lover, and she's pregnant. My husband pulled what appeared to be a new set of baby clothes from his duffel bag. It's definitely about youth. My lover is 23 years old. Get it? You should just give up. As the blood drained from my body, I could no longer stand and fell to my knees, slumped over. Our finances were separate in our dual-income life. We didn't know each other's earnings or savings, but lately, my husband had been asking me for money more frequently, saying we were short on living expenses. I had no idea he was spending it on his lover. It seems he met her at a nightclub. He squandered my money there and managed to get involved with her, who was then the top girl, leading to her pregnancy. She was good at spending money and fun to be around, which made my self-satisfied husband relentlessly insult me in my weakened state. From now on, I'll be living in a different high-rise apartment with her, so we're getting divorced. The sale procedures for this house are already complete. You need to leave as soon as possible. It was a terrifying scream. There's no way you could just sell it like that. His story was so surreal that I raised my voice without thinking. It was quite a hassle. I had to go to the office multiple times to get various documents, and the most troublesome was getting your certificate. Look at this. My husband threw my driver's license at me. It seems he took it from my wallet while I was asleep. He had also taken other important documents, like my seal and the house's registry certificate. With these documents, my husband and his lover went to the real estate agent. Unbelievably, the lover disguised herself to look older and resemble the photo on my driver's license. I wonder if the sale really went through. Real estate agents aren't blind. Maybe my husband is misunderstanding something. Either way, what my husband did is a crime. If he actually did it, it shouldn't go unpunished. The tears that had been flowing like lies stopped, and I regained my composure. That's why this house isn't yours anymore. I've decided to take all the money from the sale, so you're no longer needed. I'm giving you 3 days to pack your things and leave, my husband said, throwing the divorce papers at me with his part already filled out. I understand. I'll sign the divorce papers. In return, could you give me back all the important documents, my driver's license and my seal? If the sale is completed, you won't need them anymore, right? My husband readily agreed to my demand and returned everything to me before leaving through the front door. He was probably heading to the high-rise apartment where his lover lives. I can't forgive him. This is marriage fraud. Along with rising anger, I regretted my foolishness for believing in such a man, and tears flooded again. My husband was not really looking at me. He was after a lavish lifestyle in a high-rise apartment. He just used me for that alone. I entered the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed, curling up in the fetal position. I embraced myself and closed my eyes. Then I knew no more. Overcome by exhaustion and shock, I had apparently fallen into a deep sleep. 3 days later, my husband contacted me. On the other side of the phone, he was a different person, shouting at me in a rough tone. Hey, you're ready, right? As promised, you're moving out today. Trying to calm my indignation at his unreasonable tone, I responded, wait a minute. We've been together for a year. If we're going to part, I want to do it properly. Can I meet your lover? I couldn't just back down quietly. I have my pride too. To my surprise, my husband readily agreed, and we arranged to meet at a cafe near the station. Hey, poor single old hag, this is my girlfriend. Unlike you, she's hundreds of times younger and cuter, my husband said as soon as he entered the cafe. He found me and raised his voice without caring about the people around. Sitting next to my husband, his lover wafted a strong perfume scent and wore a tight dress that clearly outlined her body, with flashy makeup suitable for the nightlife. Brushing aside her long golden hair, she snorted as if triumphant. Really? You're so different from me. How beautiful. How did you manage to impersonate me and go to the real estate agent? I asked. Flattered by the compliment, the lover started to talk freely. For the day, I dyed my hair black, wore a hat and glasses for disguise, drew wrinkles on my face with eyeliner, and only nodded or shook my head without speaking in response to the real estate agent. I just sat there, he did all the talking. This way, we get a lot of money, right? It's easy. Such a suspicious pair, the real estate agent must have had doubts, and selling a house isn't that easy. Amazing, really impressive. I might get a call from the real estate agent in the future. The more I flattered her, the more she got carried away. She was the perfect person for gathering information. One last question. Are you really prepared to stay with my husband in the future? I looked into the lover's eyes. Her eyelashes were thick, and her eyeliner was heavily applied. Of course. He's kind and has money. I can quit my hard night job, and from now on, I'll indulge in luxury in the high-rise apartment. Plus, I'm pregnant with his baby. This lover was ultimately after money too. My husband, oblivious, was just stretching his nose in front of his young girlfriend. I presented the divorce papers to them, but my section was still blank. Wait. Why haven't you written anything? Write it down quickly, otherwise, we can't get married. The lover panicked more than expected. Did she want my husband's property that badly? Well, since you have a child, I lose. There's no sin on the unborn child. I signed the previously blank section of the document, completing it. We'll submit this ourselves, I said as I finished signing. The lover hurriedly snatched the divorce papers, folded them carelessly, and stuffed them into her bag. With a sigh of relief, my husband sat there brazenly, as if still claiming victory. I took one last look at their despicable figures and stood up. Thank you. I wish you happiness. Also, wait a week for the move out. There are many procedures to handle, like water and gas. 3 days is simply not enough. Reluctantly, my husband agreed. I left them in the cafe and walked away briskly. The place I swiftly headed to next was the familiar real estate office. Ironically, 3 days before my husband's drastic change and declaration of divorce, I had received a call from an acquaintance who worked there on a night when I was utterly exhausted. The real estate office my husband visited with his disguised lover to sell the house was ironically one where I had long-standing ties, and the person in charge was my acquaintance. This acquaintance, who knew me well, was puzzled to see the lover in disguise. However, due to professional decorum, she couldn't ask too detailed questions about non-work-related matters and handled the situation blandly, thinking it inappropriate to cause a complaint. Hesitant to finalize a sale contract with the suspicious pair under my name, my contact encouraged the lover to sign a mediation contract instead of a sale contract. The clueless pair, who hardly read the documents, believed they were signing a sale contract and were under the impression that the deal was sealed. After the lover signed, the unwitting pair left the real estate office in high spirits. There's a reason why I have a familiar relationship with this real estate office. In fact, I own this high-rise building and several other properties. My total assets amount to $130 million, which explains my deep connections with real estate people. Often, people wonder how such a plain office worker could own so much real estate. It is the result of managing assets through stocks and investments inherited from my parents, not just frivolously spending money on nightlife. Even a small amount accumulates into a large sum over time if saved diligently. Even after getting married, part of me never fully trusted my husband. I feared revealing my true identity might ruin our marriage. What if knowing about my wealth changed his personality? With these fears, I kept my significant details secret and only shared the location of the documents in case something happened. I could never have imagined he would misuse this information. It happened that my husband found the property registration certificate in the same drawer where the documents were kept and conceived this vile plan. I had failed to see what kind of man he was before we married, which is my own fault, but what my husband did was criminal. The real estate agent and I agreed on this. His actions are unforgivable. I then distributed his photo to several other real estate offices I frequently dealt with. Information spread quickly, and he was soon blacklisted as a suspected fraudster across all real estate businesses in the area. As expected, my ex-husband was arrogantly planning to make a fortune from selling the house and touring real estate offices, oblivious to the actual situation behind the scenes. A week passed as agreed. My ex-husband and his lover came to my home, thinking the divorce had been processed and they would finally own the house. Bursting with joy and anticipation, my ex-husband opened the front door with a sense of ownership. However, a harsh reality far beyond his imagination awaited him. "Hey, what's going on? Did you move out like I told you? I said you had to leave within a week." Only my ex-husband's belongings were left at the entrance. I hadn't prepared to move at all. The two of them began to rage and shout. "This is my house. You're the ones who should be leaving here. I've packed your things, so take them and leave quickly." I kept my cool despite their raging and shouting, reminding myself to stay calm and take deep breaths. "Don't talk nonsense, you crazy old hag. Didn't I tell you I've sold this house? I handled everything. If you want, I can show you the proof." Red-faced and nearly lunging at me in his fury, my ex-husband was more deranged and furious than any drunkard I'd encountered. Yet, I stared back at him without flinching. "What's that attitude for? If you can't listen to me, maybe I should make it so you can't talk either, you crazy old hag." My ex-husband charged at me from the entrance, but at that moment, the real estate agent appeared from the living room. "Please wait. You seem to be under some misunderstanding. The house has not yet been sold. The procedures are still underway." The agent stepped between us, halting my ex-husband's advance. I had asked him to be there just in case something happened. "What do you mean? I definitely signed the contract back then. Or did you deceive us? Are you a fraudster? I'll sue." My ex-husband grabbed the agent by the collar. The agent tried to calm him down, but my ex-husband's anger only escalated. "This person is the real estate agent. I always rely on him. He just told the truth and has done nothing wrong." My words only fueled my ex-husband's fury further, and he continued to rant. "I never told you, but I am the owner of this building. There's no one in the local real estate market who doesn't know me. How dare you attempt such a foolish disguise and try to sell a house without any knowledge?" At that moment, my ex-husband's face changed, and silence fell. "What you did is a crime. You're the one who should be sued. I've already filed a police report. It's only a matter of time before you're arrested. In fact, I had been recording with a voice recorder at the cafe. Your lover had freely spoken without hesitation during my questioning. Combined with documents from the real estate and surveillance camera footage, the evidence is clear. This is a solid case of fraud." Sweat poured down my ex-husband's forehead, and his face turned as red as a volcano about to erupt. As he lunged at me like a mad beast, the agent struggled to hold him back. Then, in a change of aggression, my ex-husband attempted to hit the agent. At that moment, a dull thud sounded as my ex-husband's body flew through the air and hit the floor. "Ouch! What are you doing?" The agent, who held a black belt in judo, had applied a gentle throw to prevent further harm and calm my ex-husband. It was in self-defense. "Just in case, I've installed cameras in this room, and this will also serve as solid evidence." My ex-husband was cornered. Then suddenly, he collapsed on the floor, utterly defeated. "Wait, what's going on? I thought I was going to make a fortune with that disguise and play acting. Now, not only do I not get a penny, but I'm also a criminal. I was just deceived by this old man. I did nothing wrong." The lover, who had been so arrogant, suddenly looked evasive and made excuses. "I was foolish to trust you, this penniless old man. It was always about the money for me, and the pregnancy was a lie. Once we were married and I had the money, I planned to claim a miscarriage and leave you quickly. I have no interest in an old man like you." Everyone was shocked by the lover's words. Who would have thought she was also a marriage fraudster? "You drooling over young women is disgusting, you old pervert. I'll put your stuff outside the entrance, so take it and get out of my house. The lover shouted this with a shrill voice before storming out of the entrance. Her heels echoed through the hallway, eventually fading away, and silence returned. I'm sorry it has come to this. I won't appear before you again. I'll leave this town, so could you please drop the criminal charges? An exhausted David gathered his last bit of strength and apologized. However, no matter how much he apologized, it was too late. Olivia firmly rejected her husband's plea, and so their battle came to an end. Later, I heard that David and his lover were arrested. They denied the charges to the very end, but numerous pieces of evidence led to their arrest. Months later, spring arrived again. I returned to my life alone, continuing my routine between home and work. One day, I received a call from the real estate agent. He wanted to talk, and we decided to meet in a nearby park on a peaceful weekend afternoon. We sat side by side under a cherry tree. I sensed he was different, somewhat nervous. What could it be? Suddenly, he stood up. I have always loved you, but because of my position, I couldn't express my feelings. However, I won't hide them anymore. I've decided to tell you so that no despicable man can ever take you away again. His cheeks flushed, and he looked like a boy showing an expression I had never seen before. It seemed he had always harbored feelings for me. In fact, he was the second son of the president of a renowned major real estate company, and he had suppressed his feelings, thinking it was inappropriate to be romantically involved with a valued client. His family was wealthy, and the company would be inherited by his older brother. He was prepared to start his own business, and now, seeing it as a chance, he expressed his feelings. You should be true to yourself. Do more of what you love, wear the clothes you like, and enjoy both your work and your private life. In truth, my plain appearance was a facade. I hid my real self, following my parents' teaching not to display wealth. I know your true beauty. I saw you at a real estate party, elegantly dressed and the center of attention from men. To me, you were always out of reach. Now, I will make my own success and become a man worthy of you. To think someone who truly saw me was so close. I smiled and nodded at him, looking directly into his eyes. The flower petals fluttering around seemed to be celebrating us.
I sold it for $400,000, so I'm going abroad on a trip with my lover. Hearing Nick's unusually cheerful voice, I instinctively asked, "What?" He called during his hospital stay and said, "I sold the house for $400,000. I thought, what does that mean? That house was the precious one I took over from my father. And to openly declare having a lover, that's insane. What do you mean? You sold the house, but what about Sarah?" When I mentioned our daughter's name, Nick scoffed and said, "Humph. That brat. I've always found her annoying. She has an attitude of making light of grown-ups. Of course, I'm leaving her behind." What a thing to say about his own daughter. I felt like I was going crazy with anger and shock at him declaring he sold our house and was fleeing with his lover. Somehow I must stop Nick. Even if he says he sold the house, it can't be handed over that quickly. I must stop him somehow. My name is Angela Hansen. I'm a 39-year-old homemaker. I wish I could say I live happily with my husband, Nick, 1 year older than me, and our 9-year-old daughter, Sarah, but that's far from the truth with Nick. Since we got married, his personality has gradually twisted. And I suspect he has been cheating for about a year now. I have no proof, so I haven't been able to do anything. But Nick hasn't been trying very hard to hide his infidelity. Nick works at an auto parts factory and goes out drinking somewhere 4 or 5 days a week after work. While it could be with his coworkers, he didn't go out nearly as often until a year ago. Moreover, when he comes home, I can smell a unique perfume on him. And he has been preparing expensive bags and shoes that I've never seen before. Of course, he doesn't give them to me, and he just takes the presents and goes out. I'm too scared to confront him about his cheating. So I haven't been able to take any action until I have proof. The Nick I first met seems like a completely different person. Nick and I met 10 years ago, and after dating for a year, we got married. I was attracted to his kind and gentlemanly demeanor, and before I knew it, I had fallen in love. He proposed to me on our 1-year dating anniversary, and we registered our marriage. And soon our daughter Sarah was born. From the outside, it seemed like a very happy marriage. Yet why has it come to this? It all started when Sarah was about 1 year old. As she turned 1 and became more active, moving around and rummaging through things in the house, parenting became even more challenging. I was a full-time homemaker and took care of her all day. But sometimes I couldn't manage alone, and I started asking Nick, who was tired from work, to help with baths and meals. At first, perhaps because he had a sense of being a father, he cooperated with the childcare as I asked, but as it continued every day, he gradually began to dislike it and stopped wanting to be involved. I've been thinking this, but this is your job, right? You're a stay-at-home mom. So you should be able to handle the childcare alone. Why does a tired me have to help you? After exploding with complaints, Nick threw those harsh words at me and went to the bedroom alone, leaving me and Sarah in the living room. Sarah, who was in her defiant phase and crying and fussing about putting on pajamas, was hard to calm down, and his words stabbed me in the heart. After that, Nick stopped interacting with Sarah altogether. Even on his days off, when Sarah would ask him, "Daddy, play with me," Nick would respond while reading a gambling magazine. Playing is mommy's job. I'm busy right now. He didn't listen to her feelings at all. When Sarah cried during her defiant phase, Nick would snap, glaring at Sarah and me alternately. Hey, don't cry over something like this. Angela, what kind of parenting are you doing? A stay-at-home mom who can't even handle childcare is useless. I didn't want Sarah to hear her father's verbal abuse, so I returned to the room with her. And we had no choice but to play together. Even I had moments when I wanted to enjoy my hobbies, like reading books and watching movies. But living with my daughter glued to me, I had virtually no time for myself. And yet, Nick was enjoying his hobby of gambling, while I had to endure his verbal abuse, which was unfair. But since our household was supported by his earnings, I couldn't complain. If Nick wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to feed Sarah by myself. I was also angry with myself for being so helpless. That's why Nick lived as he pleased, uninterested in parenting. It's been 8 years since then, and Sarah is now 9 years old. Nick's verbal abuse hasn't stopped. And the kind Nick from before our marriage is nowhere to be seen. I lived with Nick just to support Sarah, trying as much as possible not to provoke him. Mom, you're good at drawing, so you should get a job doing that. One day, while Sarah and I were drawing together, she suddenly said that. Oh, a job drawing?
Yeah.
Because Mom's drawings are gentle and really wonderful. She laughed cheerfully as she looked at the animal illustrations I had drawn. I've always loved drawing, and I once aimed to be a cartoon artist. I realized partway through that the path to becoming a cartoon artist was impossible and gave up. But I still draw illustrations as a hobby. I always show your drawings to Megan and Kristen, and they say they're amazing. They're envious of having a mom who can draw such pictures. Despite her father, Nick, being twisted, Sarah grew up honest and straightforward. She's cheerful and the complete opposite of my gloomy self. She seems to have many friends at school and is favored by her teachers. Feeling proud that Sarah appreciated my drawings gave me confidence. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. As I said that, she smiled like a flower blooming. If she smiles, I feel like I can keep enduring this life. I thought quietly to myself. That night, as usual, Nick came home drunk and collapsed in the living room the moment he returned. Completely intoxicated. His drinking habits have become a serious concern recently. I sighed as I took his jacket off him where he lay and checked his pockets. What is this? Usually, his pockets would contain nothing more than keys. But this time, a piece of paper fell out, and I stared at it intently. It was clearly a receipt with the name of a hotel written on it. This is definitely proof. Until now, I had only vaguely suspected infidelity, but here was physical evidence. I managed to calm my fluttering heart and quietly placed the receipt on the shelf. Then, I started thinking about how to confront Nick. The next day, with half the alcohol still in his system, Nick left the house. Sarah went off to school, and I did my usual household chores. But I couldn't get the receipt from yesterday out of my mind. I had been vaguely aware that Nick was cheating, and not confronting him was my choice. However, now that concrete evidence had come out, it was difficult to continue our life as if everything was fine, pretending to be a good couple. Within a week, or maybe even a few days, I wanted to make him admit to his infidelity and apologize. For that, I wondered what to do. As I was lost in thought, my phone vibrated. Who could it be at this time? It was rare to receive a call during the day. I looked at my phone and saw an unknown number. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I answered the call. Hello, is this Mr. Nick Hansen's residence? Yes, it is. Who am I speaking with? This is Central General Hospital. I'm calling you about Mr. Hansen. The call was from the biggest general hospital around. They informed me that Nick had been brought in by ambulance and was undergoing surgery for a kidney disease. They also mentioned that his kidneys were likely to fail, and he would need a transplant. I was confused by the sudden news when the doctor asked, "Are you okay?" Yes. Can a kidney transplant be done? Yes. We will start looking for a donor immediately, and if we find one, we can proceed with the transplant surgery. I see. I was overwhelmed with information. But the doctor continued to explain the details about the transplant surgery. We will check the compatibility with potential candidates, so please be prepared. I only understood about half of what the doctor said. But it was clear that Nick was in a serious condition due to his illness. No matter how much he mocked me or cheated, I didn't want him to lose his life. I hoped he could be saved. That night, I spent all night thinking about his transplant surgery. Weeks passed, and we received the results of the kidney compatibility tests. From potential candidates, basically family members. Surprisingly, I was the most compatible donor. His parents were still alive, but in poor health and unable to undergo transplant surgery. Since Nick is an only child, and I was the healthiest and matched his blood type, I was the best candidate. If asked whether I had any hesitation, it would be a lie to say I didn't. However, nothing could replace his life. With that thought, I decided to become the donor for his kidney transplant surgery. I explained Nick's condition and the details of our transplant surgery to Sarah. And she cheerfully said, "I understand. Good luck." While I was hospitalized, Sarah would stay with her grandparents. Despite their poor health, they were mostly able to manage on their own at home. Sarah was happy to go to her grandparents' house because she got along well with them. This way, I can be at peace for a while. I was relieved that Sarah was such a well-behaved child. With that reassurance, I faced the transplant surgery. A week later, I signed the consent form, underwent health checks, and then underwent the kidney transplant surgery for Nick. The surgery was over more quickly than I had expected. And I stayed in the hospital for about a week, while Nick stayed for about 10 days. Fortunately, there were no complications, and the recovery went smoothly. The day before I was to be discharged, I received another call on my phone. Wondering who it could be this time, I answered to hear a familiar voice suddenly say, "It's me." The caller was none other than Nick. I thought he might thank me for being a donor and asked him, "It's been a while. How are you feeling after the surgery?" I had expected him to say something like, "I'm feeling better thanks to you, Angela." "Thank you." However, the words that came through the phone were unexpected. "About our house." Nick paused for a moment. As he suddenly brought up the house, I was taken aback. "I sold it for $400,000, so I'm going abroad with my lover." Hearing his inappropriately cheerful voice, I instinctively asked, "What?" He called during his hospital stay and said, "I sold the house for $400,000. I thought, what does that mean? That house was the precious one I took over from my father. And to openly declare having a lover, that's insane." "What do you mean?" "You sold the house, but what about Sarah?" When I mentioned our daughter's name, Nick scoffed and said, "Humph. That brat. I've always found her annoying. She has an attitude of making light of grown-ups. Of course, I'm leaving her behind." What a thing to say about his own daughter. I felt like I was going crazy with anger and shock at him declaring he sold our house and was fleeing with his lover. Somehow I must stop Nick. Even if he says he sold the house, it can't be handed over that quickly. I must stop him somehow. After saying he sold the house and was going abroad with his lover, the call was abruptly cut off. I sat, bewildered, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't believe that Nick had suddenly sold our house, especially while we were hospitalized. Due to the shock, my condition worsened, and my hospital stay was extended. In my despair, I could do nothing but lie in bed alone, brooding over what would happen next. For now, I should call my daughter. If the house was gone, Sarah and I would have nowhere to return to. It was infuriating that Nick had boldly declared he had a lover. But what concerned me most was Sarah. I called my in-laws home, and my mother-in-law answered. She quickly handed the phone to Sarah. "Hello, Sarah? I'm sorry, it looks like my hospital stay has been extended. Are you okay? Are you feeling lonely? And I heard from your father that he sold our house. We've lost our place to return to." Worried about her, I fired questions rapidly. Then she replied cheerfully, "Mom, it's okay. I've taken care of it." What? I didn't understand what Sarah meant by she had taken care of it, and I was puzzled. Dad said he asked his lover to sell the house, but actually, Grandma and Grandpa. Sarah told me in detail about what had happened while I was hospitalized. I was astonished to hear that. Unexpected developments had unfolded without my knowledge. "So Mom, just rest easy. I'm fine. Thank you." Encouraged by Sarah's responsible words, I was finally able to calm down a bit. However, if Sarah's story was true, I wondered what was happening now with Nick and his lover. I was curious, but I told myself that resting was more important and went to sleep. 3 days later, after I had fully recovered, I was discharged from the hospital and headed to my in-laws' house. "Mom, welcome back." Sarah ran towards me with a happy face. Behind her, my mother-in-law squinted her eyes with a smile. That Nick really did something outrageous. "I'm sorry, Angela." My father-in-law apologized to me with a stern face. With such wonderful parents, how could Nick have turned out so twisted? "No, it's my fault for not speaking up and just following along all this time. You don't need to apologize to me. Thank you. Actually, Angela, there's something I want to tell you. Yes? What is it? I sat down in front of my in-laws, and Sarah and I listened to what they had to say. Although their story surprised me again. My mother-in-law's strong encouragement that we won't let Nick have his way reassured me. Then, on our way home, I saw a familiar face and an unknown woman arguing embarrassingly with a real estate agent in front of an office. It was unmistakably Nick. And the woman with him had to be his lover. He was in a tracksuit with messy hair. And his lover was wearing a short skirt with one high heel and no makeup. Hey, do something. What do you mean the house isn't sold? Right. What about my $400,000? Well, I can't do much. The buyer canceled the purchase last night, so the contract is now void. What? Why cancel? Damn it. Nick stomped around, and his lover shrieked beside him, drawing startled looks from passers-by. Sarah and I were surprised too, but realizing it concerned us, we approached them. What are you doing here? Startled by my sudden appearance, Nick and his lover exclaimed in an absurd tone. What are you doing here? Oh, I get it. You did this, didn't you? You must have persuaded the buyer not to go through with it. What? That's unbelievable. This makes no sense. As they hurled foul words, I subtly shielded Sarah behind me. The real estate agent looked perplexed, so I stepped forward and said, I'm his wife. The agent responded with a stunned "Oh. Are you mocking me with that cancellation? Because of you. We had to turn back right before boarding the plane. And now we can't buy a new house. I even have debts from the money I gave to her. He pointed at his lover. Now it all made sense. He had tried to sell the house I inherited from my late father to pay off the debts from the money he spent on his lover and to buy a new house for them to live in. How selfish. Ignoring Sarah's and my existence, he even tried to take away my most precious asset. Unbelievable. I was trembling with anger. Excuse me, but aren't you the one being disrespectful? What are you doing showing up all of a sudden? You're talking back to me? You can't even eat properly without me. Despite the critical situation, Nick still spewed insults, but I continued. First of all, do you really think you can sell my precious house without consulting me? I'm the owner of that house. Did you forge some documents? And you've been cursing the buyer. But the people who tried to buy the house were your parents. What? What do you mean? Yes. What Sarah told me over the phone while I was hospitalized was that my in-laws pretended to buy my house as a strategy to punish him. My in-laws had heard all about Nick's misdeeds from Sarah and were furious, saying, it's unthinkable for him to do such things to Angela and our dear granddaughter. Sarah's inherent brightness and honest nature had made my in-laws believe her story over their sons. Let me explain. Grandpa and Grandma knew about Dad and that woman. And they were really angry. I knew Dad was trying to sell the house and I talked to them about it. That house was left to Mom by her dad, and it's too important to just sell off like that. So before anyone else could buy it, Grandpa and Grandma tried to buy it on purpose. Sarah stepped forward and confidently explained the situation. Those two, what are they doing to their own son? Damn old man and old lady. And you too. A kid sticking her nose in, showing how bad her mother's parenting is. Nick, desperate, let out a vulgar laugh. Sarah did not flinch at his attack. I pulled a piece of paper from my bag and thrust it in front of his nose. Sorry, but I'm divorcing you. Seeing the divorce papers, Nick laughed through his nose again. Divorce? You said it? Fine, divorce then. You think you can live without me? Nick thought I, a homemaker, would be lost without him. That might have been true before. But now, I have a secret weapon. I opened my mouth to shatter his shallow thoughts. No need to worry. I'm going to receive a lifetime gift from your parents. Wah, a lifetime gift. What's that? Nick and his lover looked stunned. In fact, this morning I was told by my in-laws about the lifetime gift. My in-laws are in poor health and it's uncertain when they might fall ill. They wanted to give me part of their assets before anything happened. Of course, I initially refused. I thought it should go to Nick. But my in-laws said, we'd rather give it to you, Angela, who gave birth and raised our lovely granddaughter, than to a son who can't even thank her for a kidney donation. I thanked and agreed to accept the lifetime gift from my in-laws. It's your father and mother's wish. They said they wanted to give it to me, not you. Nick's face turned pale. Understandably so. Assets that should have been his were going to his soon-to-be ex-wife. That's filthy. That's not right. Parents' assets should be inherited by their children, right? I'll talk to them now. If they won't listen, I'll take them to court. He glared at me with fiery eyes, screaming. I sighed at his shallow thoughts. Maybe it's time. Shall I deliver the final blow? Stepping forward, I got close to Nick and stared him down and said, "You're talking nonsense. Ultimately, aren't you to blame for disrespecting me and even having an affair? It's your fault for spending the money, right? Your parents' decision is only natural. Besides, do you even have the money to sue? Even if you did sue, how would all your past betrayals look in court?" Nick let out a scream as if squeezed from his throat. Seeing the demonic expression on my face up close, I could tell he was shaking. Sorry, I won't sue. Please forgive me. He desperately apologized, but it was too late. I stared him down fiercely again and delivered my final words. You'll be paying property division and child support. If you can't pay, I'll chase you to the depths of hell. Be prepared. Nick and his lover screamed and ran away. The real estate agent, having witnessed everything, said with a defeated stance, "Thank you. No, I'm truly sorry for the trouble." Feeling uncomfortable staying any longer, I took Sarah's hand and headed home. Mom, you were awesome. So were you, Sarah. Thank you for fighting for Mom. Despite the situation, Sarah's face was smiling. I vowed in my heart to protect this child for life. A few months later, I was able to divorce Nick smoothly. The marriage that I had endured for so long ended with no problems, making it feel anticlimactic. I even wondered why I had tolerated everything until now. Nick, having really poured money into his affair, borrowed money to pay the property division and child support. His lover, saying, "I can't be with a poor man like this," dumped him and left. To add to his misfortune, the company Nick worked for faced a drop in sales due to a shortage of materials, forcing them to cut labor costs. Nick, who worked in the factory, was one of the first to be laid off. While it's sad, it's hard to believe he was laid off for no reason. Probably, the company started with the least productive and poorly behaved employees. Given how he had acted arrogantly at home, he must have behaved similarly towards his subordinates at work. Now, having lost his job, lover, and wife, Nick is just scraping by with part-time work. He has no motivation to look for a new job, settling into a life of working and resting as he pleases, which must be bleak and stagnant. But I had no sympathy left. I had done all I could by giving a part of my kidney to Nick. Still, he scorned me, and it seemed like karma had finally caught up with him. He'd better sweat to pay off his debts now. Meanwhile, making a living from the assets that I inherited from my in-laws. I started working on illustrations, spurred by Sarah's compliment that I was good at drawing. Orders are still few, but my clients say my work is meticulous and skillful. I'm determined to increase my clientele and raise Sarah proudly.
Wendy. When I turned around after being called from behind, it was my ex-husband, David, and his mistress, whom I hadn't contacted at all since that day. It was the first time I had seen David since our divorce, and he was completely changed. Dressed head to toe in brand name clothes. Having no particular reason to ignore him, I stopped and said, "What do you want?" Surprised by my indifferent attitude, David responded with heightened excitement. "What's with the cold reception? It's hard to believe we were married until recently. More importantly, I'm going to make it big. Is that so? Good for you." "Well, yeah. I'm marrying Kelly, so I'll become the heir to a major company. I feel sorry for finding out later, but since it's come to this, I'll let you know." "That's impossible. After all, your company is under my control." "What? No way. My name is Wendy Anderson. I live with my younger husband, David. I work at the company my father runs, mainly handling clerical work. My father, the president, is responsible for the company's major management strategies. But as I have no siblings, I will eventually take over the company. There are employees who are senior to me, so every day I face the pressure of someday becoming president." I had decided not to talk much about the family business with David. I didn't want to bring work issues into our home. His personable nature was endearing, and he was my daily source of comfort. I thought I could live a happy and enjoyable life with him, but one weekday, I went out to buy a gift for my in-laws' wedding anniversary. Should I buy flowers? Or something they can use every day? I thought, walking along when I heard whispers, "That couple is amazing. They can really do that in the middle of town?" Glancing in that direction, I saw a couple kissing. "They're quite passionate for the daytime," I thought, and was about to walk on when I did a double take. I couldn't believe my eyes. The man was David. I didn't recognize the woman with him. "Why? Weren't you supposed to go to work this morning?" No matter how many times I blinked, there was no mistaking it was David. I instinctively started filming them with my smartphone. Shopping was the last thing on my mind now, as I felt driven by a quickening heartbeat of dread to head home. Back at home, I couldn't focus on anything, not laundry, not washing dishes, not preparing dinner. What should I do? I have to finish everything before he comes back, I thought, trying to stand from the chair, but my body felt incredibly heavy, and I sat back down. This repeated several times until night fell, and David returned home. "I'm home. What's wrong?" I opened the photo album on my smartphone and showed him the pictures of him with the woman. "Hey, what's this about? Who is this woman? Tell me the truth." Part of me wanted him to deny it all. "This isn't me. You're mistaken. I was at the office working." I closed my eyes tightly, hoping to hear those words. However, what came was a casual admission of his affair. "What? You saw that?" "Yes, I'm having an affair with the daughter of a company president." David's face, mocking and cold, was unlike any I'd seen before. He seemed to have decided to be defiant, rattling off details I hadn't even asked for. "Her name is Kelly Baker. She's pregnant, so I want to divorce you and marry her. They told me to work at Kelly's parents' workplace if we get married." As he spoke so buoyantly, my heart grew colder. I felt foolish for ever thinking he was adorable. It's divorce, divorce. I want to register our marriage with Kelly soon. Yes, of course, let's divorce. I have no reason to refuse. I immediately accepted it. That's the situation, so write it down. With that, David pointed at the divorce papers he had apparently prepared in advance and left the table. He left the house without any fuss, and I was at a loss. It was sad to become strangers to my kind in-laws. But I had to report the divorce. When I met with them, both apologized. I'm really sorry. That guy is disowned. It's not both of your fault, so please don't apologize so much. I said, but they kept their heads down as if blood would rush to their heads. A week later, I called David and his mistress, Kelly, to my house. It wasn't a conversation to have in a cafe or anywhere public. So, much as I disliked it, I invited them to our home. Both of them looked dissatisfied when they were called. And without any greetings like "sorry for intruding." They roughly took off their shoes and sat in the living room chairs. I sat quietly opposite them. I called you here today for no other reason. I'm going to demand compensation for adultery from you both. First, David. You owe me $30,000. And Kelly, you owe me $20,000 each. Thanks to getting a lawyer who specializes in adultery cases. The demand was quite high. However, even after I told them, David and Kelly didn't look upset but smiled smugly. My father will pay the compensation. It's no big deal. From the way she spoke, her haughty character was apparent. She laughed at me through her nose and looked down on me with the same eyes that David had when I showed him the pictures of the affair. Birds of a feather flock together, I thought absently. The compensation was paid in cash. David and Kelly laughed at me together. You're like a money grubber. You're such a poor person wanting chump change. I watched their faces in silence, thinking, enjoy your smugness while it lasts. And then we disbanded for the day. Afterwards, since my parents' house was close by, I decided to move back in with them. My parents seemed eager to say something about my divorce. But when I told them David had cheated and gotten his mistress pregnant, they were furious. You did the right thing leaving such a man, they repeatedly said, comforting me. Since then, I threw myself into work, and before I knew it, 6 months had passed. One day, a familiar voice called from a distance, "Is that you, Wendy?" Wendy. Why are you here? Startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband David, I turned around to see him and a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s, with vibrant skin, flashy makeup, and red nails. David, clad in brand-name clothes, seemed a completely different person from when we were together. How dare you stop me when you were the one who wanted a divorce? That's pretty unreasonable. I muttered softly but stopped anyway as I had no particular reason to ignore him. Ah, what do you want? David appeared shocked by my indifferent attitude. What's with the cold reception? Hard to believe we were married until recently. To think I could casually talk to a man who cheated, got his mistress pregnant, and left on his own. Well, we were both young back then. Let me introduce you. This is my new wife, Kelly. We're here shopping for clothes for our soon-to-be-born child. More importantly, I'm going to make it big. Is that so? Good for you. Yeah. Since I'm marrying Kelly, the daughter of a company president, I'll become the heir to a major corporation. Interesting. Congratulations. And, encouraged by my interest, David began to brag. I've been promoted rapidly since marrying Kelly. So, Kelly was your lucky charm, huh? Yeah, her father, the president, recognized my work, and I became his successor. Still, it made me wonder where David could have met such a president's daughter. I was puzzled. What's the company's name? It's Baker Commerce. Hearing the name of the mistress's company made me think. It sounded familiar. After a moment, I remembered that place. And decided to share something with the two, who were looking triumphant. I feel sorry for you finding out later, but I'll tell you anyway. That's impossible. After all, your company, it's under my control. What? No way. What are you joking about? Not funny at all. You're just coasting along on your dad's connections at a company. Oh, really? You could keep your dreams to yourself. This is no joke. Although I'm mostly doing clerical work now, I'm learning management skills from my father in preparation to take over as his successor. I have to be mindful of my seniors. And sometimes it gets me down thinking I'm not recognized. So, Baker Commerce, it's under my father's company, and I'm the leading shareholder. Kelly, do you know who owns your parent company? Don't be ridiculous. It's Stone Corporation, right? Yes, I'm the daughter and the heir of Stone. What? David, you know my father is the president of a major corporation, right? It's not strange that his daughter would be a shareholder of one of its subsidiaries. Both of you, do you understand what this means? David, you becoming the successor is impossible because I, the principal shareholder, am against it. I could see David and his mistress's faces turn pale instantly. Well, I didn't know Kelly's company was under that umbrella. Having someone who cheats as a successor is too risky. I will make sure to report this properly. Because if news of the heir of a significant subsidiary being involved in cheating or divorce scandal surfaces, it will tarnish the parent company's reputation, right? Don't you think? As I said this, David, boiling with anger, retorted. You should just keep quiet about it. Yes. Just keep this between us. You must be seeking revenge because I cheated on you. What an awful woman. And what's this about going back to your parents' home now? As a shareholder, you must have a lot of money. You kept quiet about that too. In the past, being the daughter of a wealthy father, I had endured unpleasant things. Your dad is rich, so this should be easy for you, right? I was often forced to treat others or faced with prejudiced views. That's why I chose not to tell anyone. Without changing my expression, I listened to David and then spoke my mind. I don't do things I believe are wrong. I didn't mention being a shareholder because, during our time together, I didn't want to rely on my family's status. But, in the end, not letting go of the shares was like taking out insurance for myself. But after divorcing David, I realized something. Ultimately, I wanted to distance myself from my parents' home. Because I was too aware of it. I am just me, after all. I am grateful to David and Ms. Kelly for teaching me that. What's there to be thankful for? Anyway, thanks for the information. It's good to know before everything was decided. So, wait a minute, are you really the principal shareholder you claim to be? Are you just trying to get back at me for taking David away from you? Are you all living in a fantasy world? Why would I need to lie at this point? If you think it's a lie, then so be it. I'm busy. I'll take my leave now. As I spoke, David and Kelly stood there dumbfounded. but then quickly left as if they had thought of something. Soon after, I received a call from the housekeeper at my parents' home. Miss David, whom I heard you had parted with, has come and is asking to speak with your father. What should we do? It turns out David had gone directly to my parents' home to try and settle things with the president of the parent company, my father. What initiative! I'll be there soon, could you entertain him for now? I said and then hung up. I could send him away immediately, but who knows what he might do next. I've instructed them to let him in, but my father shouldn't be home at this hour, right? I'll listen to what they have to say and then send them home. After making these arrangements internally, I arrived at my parents' house to find David and Kelly being led by the housekeeper from the entrance to the guest room. No sooner had they arrived than they burst out. This is just spite on your part. What kind of company policy is this? Bring out your old man. Really, there's a limit to holding a grudge. Despite themselves being the ones who had a marriage of conquest. I thought it ridiculous. Busy as he was, my father wouldn't be home at this hour. So I played along, all right. If my father is at home, then fine. Otherwise, this conversation never happened. You two have no right to speak on this matter. They both looked frustrated. But given that my father was the president of a major corporation, they had no choice but to comply. I'll check with my father, so wait here. Hurry it up, will you? I knocked on my father's study door. Knock knock. When I opened the door, to my surprise, my father was there. Father. What are you doing here at this hour? I couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Well, just something. What about you? It's rare for you to come to my study. Well, David and his wife have come over. They want to talk to you. Understood. Let's go. My father and I moved to the guest room where David and Kelly were waiting. So, David. It's been a while since Wendy's wedding. I heard you two had parted, but what brings you here? My father spoke in a calm tone. But his overwhelming presence made David too nervous to speak. Thinking the conversation wouldn't progress this way, I took the lead. I'll explain. The company of Kelly's father, where David is currently working. He plans to marry his new wife Kelly and become the heir there. My father, arms crossed, listened intently to me as he looked towards David and Kelly. The lady here had already met David while he was still married to me. And at the time, it was an affair. And they parted with me so the two of them could be together. I informed them that I would oppose his promotion to president due to his history of infidelity and cheating, using my authority. As I spoke, I thought to myself that this wasn't an explanation I should be giving as someone who had been cheated on and discarded. My father hummed thoughtfully, arms still crossed. In the tense atmosphere, David finally spoke. Please. Our child will be born soon. It doesn't make sense for the husband of the president's daughter not to be the next president. Considering the public perception and everything else. It's a big problem if he can't become the heir because of a grudge from the divorce. Isn't it unprofessional to let personal feelings interfere with company management? I was impressed, in a bad way, that he could say such things to the father of his former spouse. As I was pondering this, my father said, I understand your desire to be president. Actually, I was in my study today because I was dealing with information that would be troublesome if leaked within the company. And that was about your company, David. After a pause, my father started speaking. To be straightforward, David, I cannot recommend you as the next president or successor. David reflexively protested. Why not? I listened quietly, realizing from my father's tone that my involvement was unlikely to be the reason. Based on the reports of your background, we knew that Kelly's husband was David. And of course, that you were married. That means we're also aware of the circumstances. That's a concern in itself, but... My father seemed hesitant to continue. I shouldn't say this. It involves privacy. My father glanced at David before stopping his explanation. Unconvinced, David pressed him. What? There's no privacy between spouses. Tell us everything. My father looked awkward. Indeed, it's terrible to leave things hanging after talking this much. I'll tell you, but I'm not responsible for what happens next. Is that okay with you? David, Kelly, and I all swallowed nervously. David, it appears you've been meeting 3 other women since divorcing Wendy. The secretary, a high school girl, and a nightclub worker. This is indefensible. Scandals are a sensitive issue nowadays. We at the top management have determined that this is due to your character. And we have decided not to recommend you as the next president. Even after hearing this, would you still say it's out of spite or personal feelings? By the way, we do have evidence. Upon hearing my father's words, Kelly's face turned bright red. David, were you deceiving me? I had no idea. Don't joke around. Our child is about to be born, too. You really lack any sense of responsibility as a father. Kelly, it may sound harsh. But getting involved with a married man means it's likely the same could happen to you. It's a good lesson, isn't it? David was no longer concerned with being the successor. And there's one more thing. Is there still something else? It's about your father, the president of Baker Commerce. My father? We also plan to request his resignation at the next shareholders' meeting. Why? If David isn't the successor anymore, isn't that enough? Why does my father have to resign over this? Well, first, take a look at this. My father handed Kelly a brown envelope filled with documents. Inside were records showing the president had used company funds to support the 2 of them. What? I don't know about this. While it's fine if he uses his personal funds for support, using the company's money counts as embezzlement. I have no choice but to act. Thank you for letting us know. David. We should discuss this matter thoroughly with both of our parents. Yes. Kelly expressed her gratitude to us and took David back home. My father and I exchanged glances. The storm has passed. I chuckled. Indeed, he agreed. Afterward, David was fired from the company, and Kelly filed for divorce, pursuing him for compensation and child support. At the shareholders' meeting, as my father had stated. 5 years later, my mother-in-law passed away, and I attended her funeral. The overcast sky seemed to reflect the sadness in my heart. The friends of my mother-in-law present were quietly shedding tears. Wendy, thank you for coming today. No, she was very kind to me during her life. While I was speaking with my father-in-law, a voice interrupted. Hey, Wendy. It's you, right? Turning towards the voice, I saw David in disheveled morning clothes. He appeared much older than his years. Surprised to see him there, I widened my eyes in shock. And my father-in-law looked equally puzzled. Why didn't you invite me, Dad? I'm her real son. Mom must be sad not to see me. David, you were disowned, that's why you weren't invited. You. Did you look up the funeral details yourself? His loud voice was embarrassing. As he approached, my father-in-law stepped back with each word. Well, anyway, I should get part of Mom's inheritance, right? Huh? How can you say such a thing in front of grieving people? The other attendees stared at David in disbelief. There's no money for you. Mom's inheritance will be donated in full to an orphanage. That was her wish. My father-in-law's voice trembled, his forehead vein bulging with anger. What? Then how am I supposed to live? What are you talking about? You're healthy. Work and earn your own money. And please, don't cause a scene during the funeral. Unaware of the cold stares from around him, David turned his gaze from my father-in-law to me and stepped closer. I inadvertently let out a small scream and hastily shut my mouth. Then stepped back like my father-in-law. Then give me back the compensation. Your father's a big company president, so it shouldn't matter, right? Why do you need money so badly? You said the compensation was just spare change back then. David began to explain his current situation. Things have changed. After the divorce, I was fired. I've been to interviews, but no one will hire me. I can't pay back the money I borrowed for compensation. And child support to you and Kelly because I'm unemployed. I have to pay child support every month. I need the money for that. Despite David's pleas, I had no obligation to refund the compensation. Try to find a job and manage your finances to pay it back. As I suggested this, he shook his head and suddenly grabbed my arm strongly. What are you doing? Even though I knew I shouldn't shout in front of others, I couldn't help but react reflexively. Please, I want to remarry you. If we get remarried, the compensation will be returned. And I'll be freed from this debt-ridden life. Stunned and unable to speak, I tried to pull away, but his grip didn't weaken. Do you seriously think I would want to remarry you? There's no way that would happen. The moment I saw you admit to cheating and act so nonchalant about it, any love or other feelings I had for you disappeared. Who was it that accepted the divorce with such insulting remarks at that time? And yet you have the audacity to turn around and press for remarriage. It just feels like you're mocking me. You still love me, don't you? Those words earlier were just you not being honest with your feelings, right? I felt like slapping the man in front of me who was grossly mistaken. However, I am a rational person. To act impulsively would make me no better than someone who cheats without thinking. As I said earlier, I've long since lost any feelings for you. Please let go of me. Just as I said that, someone called my name, overlapping my words. Looking in that direction, I saw a man walking towards me with a little girl. Mama, the girl called out to me in a childish voice as she ran up to me. Who is this girl? She's my daughter. My daughter and I share a striking resemblance. Even without asking, it should be clear we are mother and child. But David seemed unable to accept it, his eyes darting around in confusion. I remarried. My in-laws introduced me to someone. David noticed the matching rings on my and my husband's ring fingers, and his body seemed to deflate, his knees hitting the ground. After the divorce debacle, my mother-in-law had said, I don't know if it counts as an apology, but I want to introduce you to a wonderful person. He's very serious, kind, and sincere. Would you meet him once? That's how I met my husband. We had come to the funeral as a family to pay respects, as my mother-in-law had taken good care of us during her lifetime. Mommy, what's wrong with him? Pointing at David, who seemed lost to the world. My daughter's voice snapped him back to reality, and he stood up, staggering away as if deflated. "Wendy, I truly apologize. I had no idea he would come here," my father-in-law said. Afterward, my father retired as president and became the chairman. Then sold all his shares, acquiring a substantial fortune. When David noticed me at the funeral, I was startled, wondering if he had caught wind of this. However, now that he knew I had a new husband, he would likely no longer interfere. David was destined to struggle with his debts for the rest of his life. Thanks to my father's wealth, we were able to live a comfortable life. Our daughter was growing healthily, and her capabilities were gradually increasing. Both parents watched over her warmly. My father's face always softened adorably when called Grandpa, his smile deepening. Having become a dependable father and a kind grandfather, I wanted to repay my father for all his help in any way I could, hoping for our family to continue living happily together.